This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. World oil demand will rise more than 2% to a record high of 101.6 million barrels per day, BPD, in 2023, the International Energy Agency said on Wednesday, although sky-high oil prices and weakening economic forecasts dimmed the future outlook. The Paris-based IEA also said in its monthly report that supply was being constrained because of sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Economic fears persist, as various international institutions have recently released downbeat outlooks, the IEA said, forecasting demand would rise 2.2 million barrels of oil per day, or 2.2%, in 2023 compared to 2022 and would exceed pre-pandemic levels.
China's refinery throughput in May fell 10.9% from the same month a year earlier in the steepest year-on-year drop in at least a decade. Data showed on Wednesday, as strict COVID-19 lockdowns slammed fuel demand. Crude throughput last month was 53.92 million tons, or about 12.7 million barrels per day, BPD, according to data from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. Throughput inched up from 12.61 million barrels of oil per day in April, which was the lowest in 2 years, but was a steep 1.55 million barrels of oil per day below the year-earlier level, according to Reuters records of official data.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
U.S. crude stocks and distillate inventories rose while gasoline inventories fell in the week through June 10, the Energy Information Administration said on Wednesday. Crude inventories rose by 2 million barrels in the last week to 418.7 million barrels, compared with analysts' expectations in a Reuters poll for a 1.3 million barrel drop. Crude stocks at the Cushing, Oklahoma, delivery hub fell by 826,000 barrels in the last week, EIA said. Refinery crude runs fell by 67,000 barrels per day in the last week, EIA said.
Oil prices edged down 1% on Wednesday on the back concerns over fuel demand and global economic growth ahead of an expected big hike in interest rates by the Federal Reserve as U.S. oil production reached pre-pandemic levels. Brent crude futures for August were down $1.04, or 0.9%, at $120.13 a barrel by 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 1500 GMT, having fallen as low as $119.26 earlier in the session. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude for July fell $1.56, or 1.3%, to $117.46 a barrel, after dropping to a low of $116.60. U.S. crude production rose to 12 million barrels per day last week, its highest level since April 2020, data from the Energy Information Administration showed.
Next, we have the top news in metal markets.
China's monthly production of aluminium reached a record high in May, showed official data on Wednesday, following easing in power consumption curbs and as COVID-19-induced lockdowns had little impact on output. Primary aluminium output in the world's largest producer and consumer of the metal rose to 3.42 million tons, up 3.1% from the same month a year earlier, National Bureau of Statistics data showed, and up from 3.36 million tons in April. On a daily basis, aluminium production in May stood at 110,322 tons, showed Reuters calculations based on the data, easing from April's record daily output of 112,000 tons.
China produced 4.1% more crude steel in May compared to the month before as disruptions from COVID-19 lockdowns around the country gradually eased and mills eyed a recovery in demand. The world's biggest steel producer made 96.61 million tons of the metal last month. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, showed on Wednesday, compared with 92.78 million tons in April. Average daily output in May was 3.12 million tons, according to a Reuters analysis of the NBS data. That compared with 3.09 million tons of daily production in April, and was the highest level since June 2021. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, has ordered a 4-month suspension in exports and re-exports of wheat and wheat flour originating from India, the world's second biggest producer of the grain, state news agency WAM said on Wednesday. The Gulf nation's economy ministry cited interruptions to global trade flows as the reason for its move, but added that India had approved exports of wheat to the UAE for domestic consumption. India banned wheat exports in a surprise move on May 14, except for those backed by already issued letters of credit, LCs, and to countries seeking to ensure food security. Since then, it has allowed shipments of 469,202 tons of wheat.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.